Today, folks, in the studio, I got a real treat for you, especially if you got kids and you know deep down you ain't the best parent you can be, or at least the best dad. Larry Hagner from the Good Dad Project. What's cracking?
What's going on, man? It's good to be here.
Dude, it's good to have you, especially for me. I got a lot of questions for you. You got, ultimately your stories goes back from, youngster. You didn't have a dad, right? Or you had one, but you didn't have one around.
Well, so I had several sort of float in and out over a time span of about, 18 years. So
any abuse?
Oh yeah.
Do you know the craziest thing I learned the other day?
What's that?
The number one indicator of abuse in the house, child abuse, there's a factor that if this factor's present, they're 100 times more likely to have child abuse.
What's that?
Step parent.
Really? What? Yeah,
that is
about right.
It's mind blowing. So if there's a step parent in the house, there's a high chance there's abuse going on. Isn't that weird?
I can believe that.
Well, it's crazy. So you had several step parents. Your dad was absent. What happened when your mom and dad divorced?
Yeah. So I was born in 75. My parents married in 71. From what I understand, they were married. When I was born, they only stayed together for about 9 more months. And then I believe, from what I understand, their divorce was pretty bad. So much so that they completely split. I didn't know my father growing up. And in fact, kind of a funny story. I'm 40. I just turned 46. And I remember this like it was yesterday. When I was 4, I was in preschool. And I knew what a dad was because I saw men come pick up their kids. I was like, oh, that's a dad. But my understanding of a dad at 4 years old was moms go out and find dads. So, kids are sort of magically appear and then moms will go out and find dads. And my version was like, well, my mom just hasn't found us one yet. And that's okay. It didn't really bother me, but that was my version up until I was 4. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's funny. So what did your parents get divorced for? Do you know?
I don't really know.
What's the story?
The details that I know is they got married very young. So I think they were 20, 21 years old, somewhere around there. They were moving around quite a bit because my dad was in the military. And I believe they just didn't get along. It was 2 strong personalities. I didn't ask. I don't ask a lot of questions about it.
You said that the divorce was bad. Usually, when it's bad like that, it's based on someone cheated, something happened.
So I believe there was that on both sides. But again, they were young, they were making mistakes. There was a lot of tension. You just make mistakes when you're younger. I think that's just what they did, and it didn't turn out well.
Was this a small town or a large town?
From what I understand, we moved around quite a bit. I'm from St. Louis, but at the time my mom and him were living in San Francisco. So we lived there for a few years. And like I said, I don't remember much of any of it, but the detail that I do know is it was a little tumultuous and 2 strong personalities getting married at a young age and moving around quite a bit, new baby. There was a lot going on.
So, but long story short, even though I want to get into that story now, obviously you have the Dad Edge, you have the Dad Edge Alliance. Is that right?
Yep.
Where ultimately you're teaching dads how to be good dads. Correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And have good marriages, communication, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think your childhood is what affected this? What made you passionate about it?
Without a doubt. So I'll share some of my childhood journey. When I was, I already said, my mom and biological father got divorced. I didn't know him. My mom did meet a man. This is kind of a funny story. My mom was dating a guy that she worked with, and I was 4 years old, and she brought this guy home to meet me for dinner. I don't know how long they were dating, and I'll never forget this. It's the first time I ever remember a male presence coming into my house. So this guy walks in. He was a white collar software data engineer. It's 1979. He's got the 3-piece suit on, the double Windsor knot. His hair's feathered. He's got the handlebar mustache, trench coat, briefcase, no iPads back then. And this guy walks in, and I shook his hand, and I said, "Are you going to be my dad?" Like literally the first question I asked this guy when he walked in the door. And I think my mom, to be honest, she was single up until that time. I think she took that as a sign that, hey, I really do need a father for this young man, because it was just me and her at the time. And they did get married, and they were together for until I was 10. So 5 years married. And what I can tell you about him is he was one of the nicest guys. Polite, manners. He was ex-military, taught me a lot about manners. Yes, sir, no, sir, please, thank you. But he was nice when he was sober. And when he was drinking, man, it got ugly. Screaming, yelling, pushing, hitting. There were times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and my mom's screaming and walk in their bedroom and he's got her pinned down. They're hitting each other. Police were called a few times from what I remember growing up from the neighbors. And every year that they were together, it just got worse. I'll never forget being 9 years old. It was the last year that they were married. He was living downstairs in our basement and my mom was upstairs. And he had lost his job. He fell into this crazy deep depression. I remember going downstairs where he was sleeping on a floor like this, like the cold, hard floor. And I'd go down there to check on him a couple times a day when he'd be sleeping, checking to see if he was still alive, like wondering if he was dead. And then they got divorced when I was 10. I haven't seen him since. And unfortunately, I found out about 7 years ago he had passed away. But I only found that out because I had someone from the courts knock on my door telling me that I was his only living heir and he had a house that he left behind. Otherwise, I had not seen him since. So I started asking a lot of questions like, where did I come from? Like, who's my real, because I knew at that point that he was not my real father. And that's when my mom told me, well, I was married before him. You have another father out there. And I saw the wedding album. I knew what he looked like. I knew his name. And when I was 12, I'll never forget this. I was at a rec center playing basketball with a friend of mine. I knew his name, and his last name is not very common. And I heard somebody say here comes a woman's name and the last name. And it's not a common last name. And I don't know what it was in me at 12 years old, but I asked the clerk, I was like, what name did you say? And he said the name. And I was like, do you know who her husband is? He said, yeah, her husband's Larry, same name as mine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that's my dad's wife. So I went up to her at 12 years old, just curious little kid. And I was like, hey, what's your name? And she just looked at me and she told me. And I said, are you married to Larry? And she said, yep. And I said, I think your husband is my dad. And you just saw like this look on her face, like, are you Larry? And I'm like, yes, I am. And she's like, would you like to talk to him? I was like, yes, I would. And so she brought me around the corner to where there were payphones, popped a quarter in. She called home. She's like, hey, so I'm with your son up at the Civic Center and he'd like to talk to you. She handed over the phone. And I just remember hearing this very humble voice. And we ended up connecting. I went home. I told my mom what happened. She was a bit taken back and I requested, hey, can I meet him? And she said yes. So I ended up meeting him. We spent 6 months together and we had a good relationship. He had a 2-year-old son, another one on the way, married to this woman. And he came to my Little League games. I immediately called him dad. I was so excited. I was like, man, this is so cool. Like I have my dad back in my life. And I just remember the last month that we were hanging out. It was like in the 6th month. And I remember if you've ever dated somebody and you know that the person you're dating is just not into you anymore, but they haven't said it yet. You just feel it. And I just felt that. And I'll never forget calling him one day. And I'm like, hey, like, is everything okay? Like, I just don't hear from you anymore. Like, I feel like something's wrong. I feel like there's tension. Like, is there something going on? To this day, I don't remember the exact words that were said. I just remember that my dad had this feeling of, I can't do this right now. This is very hard for me, right? He was 2-year-old son, another one on the way. He was remarried. My mom was, I think, causing some commotion in the background between them as well. Nothing bad, just like, really putting a lot of pressure that he needs to do this and he needs to do that. I don't really know. And that was it. We ended that relationship there. My mom continued to date. All these other guys were the exact same way, heavy drinkers. She got married one more time, but every guy was the same guy. Toxic, partier, drinker, screamer. hit you. So I really learned all these things of what not to do, right, growing up. And I'll finish the story here. So I'm 30 years old. This is 16 years ago. Let me back up for a second. When I was 12 and all this went down, man, I gave up on life. I started eating emotionally. I failed the 8th grade. I had to do 8th grade twice. And I just was lost and just didn't have any hope. I finally got my act together, did 8th grade again, went to high school, went to college, graduated, got a degree, went on to pharmaceutical sales. And I'm 30 years old and I'm sitting in a Starbucks in St. Louis. And I was there for a meeting with one of my partners. And I'm sitting there and I look over, and who came walking in the door but my father. Hadn't seen him in 18 years since that phone conversation. And I remember the coworker I was with, she looked at me, she's like, "Are you all right? Are you still here? Like, what's going on with you? You look like you're seeing a ghost." I was like, "Well, you see that guy over there?" I was like, that's my father. And she's like, "Oh my God, are you kidding me?" I'm like, "Nope." She goes, "What are you going to say?" I was like, "Nothing. It's been 18 years. Last time I saw him, that's what happened. I think we're good." So without one word, she walked up, went over to him. And that's when, like, fight or flight, like, what do you do? Like, do I run? Do I get out of here? Do I go to the bathroom? Do I stay here? And they're about 50 feet away from me. And she sat down next to him and started talking to him. And I'm looking over and I could read his lips, and I saw him say, "Where is he?" And he started looking around. And then we made eye contact. And, like, there's nothing more awkward than not seeing your father for 18 years who left the picture twice. And he gets up, comes over, shook my hand. I wasn't nice, but I wasn't cold. I was just sort of numb. Long story short, that interaction has now turned into a 16-year relationship. He's still married to the same woman. They've been together for over 40 years. I have 2 younger half brothers that I get along with great. But it's all about the decision. We've had 2 or 3 conversations about the past, and we've just decided not to go there anymore. My dad's 73 years old. He's still young at heart. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. But I've made the decision, and so is he, that the past is the past, and we can have an amazing future. And what are the possibilities here for our relationship versus what went wrong? And that's the decision that we've made. But Dad Edge really started with, I made a promise to myself that I was like, man, I am not going to be what I grew up with. And that's exactly what I was becoming, unfortunately, because I think really what we focus on expands. And I'm happy to give you any detail you want around that, because it was not pretty.
Well, number one, I agree that what we focus on expands. But when you said you were turning into him, did you leave your wife?
No. In other words, my mom it really didn't have much to do with him. It had everything to do with these men who were just in and out of my life. My mom would date somebody for anywhere from a month or 2 or years, or they'd get married. But it was always like the same type of guy.
So you were turning into that kind of guy?
I wasn't nearly as bad. Like, I never physically harmed my kids. I never threw beer bottles at them. I never dropped F-bombs at them. I've never to this day, I've called my wife a name, ever. But what I was doing, I had this deep desire to show up as a father and as a husband, and I wasn't doing it. I was doing fatherhood and marriage from out here. Like, I got all my validation in one area of my life, and that was the workplace, because I was good at my job. But my marriage was mediocre at best because we didn't really communicate. I didn't know. I did not have the skills. I did not know how to connect with my wife. And my patience was so thin with my kids. Now, again, I never hit them. However, I will say this. Dad Edge, Good Dad Project started because I did enter into that world where I struck my 4-year-old son, who was 4 at the time. I hit him, and he hit the ground. I spanked him.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask that. I got that written big because when I was a kid, I'd get my ass beat with a belt.
Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
And I'm not traumatized by it. And I think, I don't spank my little girls because, number one, they're little girls. And number two, I didn't like getting spanked. I know that. But a lot of people say, that's the trouble today. They're not getting spanked. What's your thoughts on spanking?
I don't believe in it. I'm not
saying.
What
if talking doesn't work?
What if talking doesn't? I think there are other things. If you know what your kids' hot buttons are, as far as now, I'm no parenting expert. I'm not gonna. I will never tell a parent you should or shouldn't spank. I just chose that that's not a route I wanted to take.
Under any circumstances. So let's say you're telling him, hey, get in your room. You're not allowed to. And he basically says, pound sand, Dad. And he ain't listening and he's acting a fool. Now he's getting a little too old to spank anyway. I mean, there's an age where spanking, I think, is, a swat on the butt. And then there's spanking where you got to take a belt because a swat on the butt's not going to do anything. Right. I think there's a time in there where little smack works. Don't you? Or you just, no circumstances would you ever smack a kid? Or again, if I'm in the Dad Alliance, are you going to educate me not to? Because you're going to have to give me tools that work then.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are skills that you can learn. There are tools that you can learn to discipline. Like, so for instance, I know the hot buttons. Like my littles, I call them the littles. They're 7 and 5. I have 15, 13, 7 and 5. And I can tell you that I know the hot buttons with my little ones. I don't know. Maybe we just lucked out, but I haven't had to resort to that. I'm not going to say it's right or wrong for parents to do it. That's up to them. But what I can tell you is that there's a reason that I didn't want to do it. And I think it was because of how it was done to me growing up.
Which was excessive.
Excessive. The name call. A lot of these beatings came in drunken blurs.
Yeah.
And I knew. Here's the thing. My son, who I spanked so hard and he hit the ground, he's 13 now. And this is what got me. It wasn't necessarily the spanking. We were getting ready to move, and I was packing up his playroom. And I was your typical dad, stressed out from the workday. Patience was thin. Wish my marriage was better. Not getting the intimacy that I truly wanted with my wife. Not showing up the way that I wanted to. I was like, I knew that there was more there, and I was always just frustrated with myself because I knew that there was more. And it always took that small thing that your kid does for me to lose my shit on him, right? Whether it be screaming or yelling at him, or in this case, spanking. But here's what got me in that moment. We were packing up, ready to move, and I was packing up his playroom, and I had spent hours. I had a couple beers while I was packing up his playroom, and he came downstairs to play in his playroom, and I looked at him, and I said, under no circumstances do you unpack anything in these boxes that I packed up. You understand? I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back in 30 minutes, and you better, just the toys that are already out, those are the toys you play with. Well, what do you think happened? I came downstairs, and the stuff was pulled all out of boxes, and I spanked him, and I spanked him hard that he went down. And I was like, oh, crap. And I went to help him up, and this is what got me. I went to help him up, and he looked at me and shuddered and looked at me like I was a monster. And that's why I won't discuss whether I think spanking's right or wrong, because in that moment, I didn't see my 4-year-old son. I saw me as a kid. And that was it. It was in that moment. And I did what every adult does. I went into my office after that happened, and my wife, who is extremely supportive, very low maintenance, she never nags me about anything. And she looked at me and she was like, really? She's like, he's 4. You just hit him. He hit the ground. Like, seriously? And my wife will never say anything like that. And I knew at that point that was bad. So I went in my office and I did what every adult does when you're stressed out. You go get on your computer and you get on Facebook just to distract yourself. And it was in that moment I was crying. I was like, man, this is not the way I wanted my parenting to go. I know exactly what this feels like. And this is exactly the opposite of what I want. And I saw this button in the lower left-hand corner of the page, and it said, create a page. I don't know what it was within me. I'm strong with my faith. Maybe that was divine intervention, but I hit that button. And the words, The Good Dad Project, just rolled off my mind, off my heart, onto that keyboard. And that was a surrender. And I was just like, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to create a connection with my wife. I don't know how to communicate with her. I don't know how to have patience with my kids. I don't know how to talk to my kids. I have a hot temper and I want to be better. And what I decided to do, I never did this for a following, ever. I did this because I'm going to learn something new every day. And I'm just going to post it here. And I'm just posting it for public accountability. And that's all I did it for. And then suddenly people started asking me to speak. And I'm like, speak on what? Like, I'm an idiot, moronic dad. And they're like, just authentic day in the life of dads. You know, the first speaking event I ever did was for 300 moms. And I just spoke from the heart of an authentic man who struggled. And then in 2013, I started the blog, Good Dad Project. Started the podcast in 2015, wrote my first book, been podcasting for 6 years, 750 shows. And what I can tell you is this. I'll never call myself a dad guru. I'm a dad student. You know, my 15-year-old who's here with us in the studio, he's like, what's it like to be a dad? I was like, well, think of your first day of school. Right now, you're 15 years old in 90 days. Tomorrow, you'll be 15 years old in 91 days, and that will be my first day, raising a 15-year-old who's 15 in 91 days. So I have to constantly be learning. And what I can tell you is the podcast and the movement, the community has been a front row seat to one of the most invaluable educations I could have ever asked for. And I've got to have amazing conversations with high-level people like yourself. Matthew McConaughey just came on the show. Jocko Willink, all these amazing people. And what I can tell you is no matter how we're operating in our life, whether it's you're an elite athlete, you know, a 3-time World Series pitcher like Todd Stottlemyre, or you're somebody like Matthew McConaughey, or you're a decorated Navy SEAL like Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, we all put our pants on the same way when it comes to fatherhood. And it's so important to us. And what it really boils down to is like this perception that we have to understand and we have to know how to do this stuff naturally without any support, without any training. And that's how the whole thing got started.
Well, good thing it did, because you probably saved a lot of marriages, saved a lot of kids' upbringing. Let's talk about like some of the things you can do, because, you know, I'm guilty of the yelling, I think. I get aggravated fairly quick because it's noisy and they're screaming and and I'm older and like, you know, loud voice works. Quiet, nice voice doesn't work. I've tried it. It doesn't work. I raise my voice, they listen. I say it nicely, they keep going. How do you train somebody to do it better?
I like to execute in the majority of the time in that way. Ethan, my 15-year-old who's here with me, he will sit here and tell you that last week I had a moment with my younger son where he did something that definitely was not within his character. He was hanging out with the wrong kid. I try to stay away from the F-bomb when I'm raising my kids as much as I can. But I think I dropped it and got in his face and screamed and yelled at him. He basically, what happened was he got caught shoplifting. He got caught shoplifting a $3 item from a store. And I only knew this because the store owner posted a photo and this other kid on social media. And here's what I can tell you. Did I hit him? Nope. Did I decide to take everything away from him and ground him? I didn't. I did actually something very, very different. I think there comes a time where you absolutely have to discipline hard, right? And there have been times, Ethan's shaking his head, that you have to do that. But there are also times where I think the punishment has to have a good outcome tied to it. So like for him, I did something different. We had an in-depth conversation about why he suddenly was hanging out with this kid. And they'd only been hanging out for like a month. And it boiled down to a conversation where he got very authentic and very vulnerable. And he's like, Dad, like, look at my circle of friends. Like, I've had 2 friends move. Gone. I used to hang out with them every day. I had this friend over here. He's no longer in the neighborhood. I barely see him. Like, when I started hanging out with this kid, I didn't have a circle of friends. He's like, and when I was getting the peer pressure to do it, because this kid did it first, he's like, I didn't want to say no because I didn't want to lose somebody else in such a short period of time. So I thought to myself, because at first I was like, you're not seeing the light of day. You're not going to use your phone. You're going to be in your room. You're not going to have TV. You're going to pull yard work. You're going to do this. You're going to do, I mean, like, it was like basically a sentencing, right? And after he told me that, I understood that. And this is where the power of community, I think, really comes in, because I posted something up in our mastermind group and I said, hey, how many of you guys have either done this or dealt with this? I don't think that there was one person in the group who's like, oh yeah, I shoplifted when I was a kid. I got caught. Here's what happened. There were so many people that raised their hand and be like, yeah, I did that. Learn from it. So I took them up to the place and I said, we're going to make this right. We sat down. We had a conversation with the owner. He paid for the item. We went back home after he told me everything and why he was doing what he was doing. I was like, okay, probably one of the worst things I could do for his mental health right now is to isolate him more and to take more away. So what could I add here? What could we do that's positive? So I told him, I was like, listen, we're going to do what it is I'm about to lay out here for the next month. If you can stick to it, we'll talk about freeing you back up again. So right now he's up by 9 a.m. every day. He has a schedule that's on an Excel spreadsheet. He starts his day with journaling and reflection, and he writes down exactly what he's going to be doing hour by hour, and he's got a schedule. 9 a.m. to 10, he's breakfast, brushes teeth, getting ready for the day. 10 a.m. to 11, he's exercising. He's either walking our dog, he's running, working out in some way, shape, or form. I might be with him. From 11 to 12, he's doing 3 identified chores that I have written down that he does, and it could be pulling weeds, it could be cutting the grass, it could be cleaning out the garage, whatever. From 12 to 5, if he accomplishes those things, then from 12 to 5, he can have free time with his friends. By 5 p.m., he's back home. If he has football practice that night, he goes to football practice. Otherwise, he can be back with his friends until 8 p.m., and then he's home. And I have to know where he's at all times. And what I can tell you is that tight container of structure. I mean, wouldn't you agree, in the past week, I've seen that kid completely turn a corner and thrive. And he thrives within that structure. He knows what's coming next. I didn't completely take away his social circle. And what I'm trying to teach him in this moment is like, here's what could be if you focus on positive things versus I'm just going to take everything away and just make your life a living hell. Because I mean, that's probably how our generation was. That's how I was raised. That's probably how you were raised. You know, you do something wrong, everything's taken away. But I think it's also really important. I think there's a time and a place for that. I'm not going to say that that's a never thing. But I also think we can teach our kids really good habit around self-discipline and structure that will help them make better choices down the road.
Now, what about iPads, screen time? I know you have a lot to say about screen time. What do you say to the parents that are just handing the iPads as the new babysitter?
I mean, our kids only get their iPads for like 11 hours a day. So that's it. No, I'm kidding.
That's my kids.
Right. Yeah. Well,
I'll bet you if I FaceTime them right now, they'll answer because they're on their iPads.
They're on their iPads. The iPad is
now my 8-year-old wants a cell phone, and like my wife almost went to get it twice. I said, "Babe, she's 8. She's not getting a cell phone."
Right.
All her friends have a cell phone.
Yeah.
Please let me get a cell phone. So now she's going from an iPad to a cell phone.
Right.
She's on iPads all through dinner.
Right.
Dinner, they've got their iPads or they won't eat dinner. Like, wow. Dude, it's not good.
Yeah.
And I keep saying, babe, I'm not a parent expert, but I know this is not going to end well.
Right. So I've had an advantage with being on the show. So I've had on Arlene Pelicante. I'm sorry, Pelicane. She's written 2 books on screen time. And then I've had Cam Adair, who founded the organization called Game Quitters. Cam Adair was the most fascinating because he would spend, 12 to 16 hours a day playing video games. So that's like he's written a couple books. He knows in depth what happens to the brain when you have too much screen time. And so does Arlene. I've had several others on, but
what happens?
So your brain. So one of the things you do is I look around this amazing office, right? And the amazing things that you've created with your brand, being in front of a screen, what it does is it switches off the creator and the producer part of the brain, because the brain gets so used to consuming. So it becomes like a consuming content machine versus like creating. That's why when you put kids in front of a blank piece of paper and you say, hey, draw something, they're like, I don't know what to draw. But back when you and I were kids, we'd be like, oh, let's draw a stick figure and all this other, like, right? We just use our imaginations. What happens is over time, a lot of screen time will shut that part of the brain off. It'll also increase anxiety. It'll increase stress. The chances of depression are higher. Even social, like in-person social interaction and conversations, they don't have the skills because they're so used to consuming videos and information versus actually having a conversation with somebody. So, we have a hard rule, no screens at dinner. We don't do that. Hour of screen time for the kids a day. Now, that's not to say that they can't text and call and that kind of thing, which they do that. But their phone automatically shuts down all the apps of YouTube and TikTok and all that after 1 hour of watching that. And one thing I can tell you is it painful? Because I remember when you guys were little, my kids, we after learning that, I was like, oh man, we got to really reduce this a little bit. And there's like a 14 to 30 day window that it sucks. It's painful because your kids, man, they're like, I'm bored. I don't know what to do. And they will flip out. One thing I learned from those two guests in particular is the words, I'm bored, is a wonderful sentence for them to say, because that's an opportunity to be like, well, what would you like to do? And I told you I just wrote this book called Screen Time, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. If you sit down with your kids and just ask them, if you didn't have your phone or iPad and you had to choose 3 to 5 things that you enjoy the most, what would they be? And then you make that list, and then they've identified what it is that they would do. Well, then after that, when they don't have that iPad, be like, hey, you made this list of 3 to 5 things you really like to do. Which one of those would you like to do right now? And if they kick and scream and whine, be like, sorry, it's not what we're doing right now. And they do get used to it, but it's that 14 to 30 days. It's painful. It's so painful.
When they're thrashing about.
When they're thrashing, I mean, because
we can't get through that 14 days. That's because my wife, in fairness, has said, we're going to restrict this, restrict that. But when they start screaming and kicking, she ends up giving up, or I do. It's hard.
It's so hard.
That's what I asked earlier. Why wouldn't every dad be in the alliance, the Dad Edge Alliance? How do they join that? If someone's listening, they already know they're either new parent or a bad one. And by the way, just because you don't beat your kids, like I don't beat my kids, I'm a good dad, but not compared to the dad I could be.
Right.
Like I don't think I have a connection. Like if my little girls get hurt, they run to their mom. Well, why don't they run to me? There's got to be a reason. I walk in at night. They don't run up and hug me for some reason. They just sit there and look at their iPads. I mean, they don't not like me, but they also they're not real affectionate towards me.
Right.
Why is that? There's got to be a reason.
I think, here's what I've learned about just men in general, right? The men that come and do life with us in the Alliance community, they already really have everything that they need to be the dad that they want. They just don't know exactly the tactics to unlock it, right? I'll give you an example. It takes 990 hours to go from police academy cadet to cop. It takes 8 years of medical school and I think 2 or 3 years of residency and fellowship for you to be a surgeon. And everybody understands that, right? I interviewed a UFC legend, Frankie Edgar, and we joked about this when I was on his podcast. I was like, I know a little bit of MMA, but you've spent the most amount of minutes in the cage of any fighter that's ever walked in the cage. And if he's only 145 pounds, I'm 185. And I told him, I was like, if I were to walk in the cage with you without any training and I would just do my best and I got pummeled, which I would, no one would give that a second thought. Be like, of course you got pummeled. Did you even train? Did you even learn any skills whatsoever? Did you even learn how to defend yourself? Of course you got pummeled. Yet, as fathers, man, and I still have yet to figure this one out. Maybe it's ego. Maybe it's that number one word of should, right? I should be I should be a good dad naturally. I shouldn't need any help. Well, I should be a professional MMA naturally without any training. That's how foolish those two statements say. But what I can tell you is most men have that perception of this should come naturally to me without learning anything, because that's what my dad did, right? And usually if you ask those guys, a lot of men, did you have a good experience? Most of them didn't. But we have this perception that we need to execute fatherhood flawlessly without any training, without any support, without any mentoring or guidance or anything like that. And I think that perception is literally what ruins the journey for us, right?
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, I'm just sitting there thinking about all the different scenarios I've been in and how I've handled them, and then how I would have wanted to handle them, but you just don't know how. Like again, I mean, I want to be the guy that, you know, they run to if they get hurt, and I'm all, you know, nice to them and comfort them. They don't, number one, they don't run to me. Number two, even if they did, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you know, pamper them. So it's almost like, how do you learn what to do? Shouldn't it be instinctual? I mean, obviously, you know, I'd protect them and all that.
Sure.
But like, sometimes if they want to play a game, I don't want to play.
Right.
Like, I don't want to play.
Yeah.
This is aggravating me. So, you know, here's your iPad. How do you get around having to do this crap you don't really want to do? You just got to bite the bullet, just like working out, just like training for MMA.
Yeah. So, you know, all my kids will tell you they want, you know, when it comes to playing with them, right? There are things that bring me tremendous joy playing with them. And there are some things I'm like, I'll share this with, you know. So Minecraft, I don't mind playing, right? I mean, because we create things. We're not on survival mode. We create things. And it's kind of cool to see that. Now, video games are not my thing. I mean, and nothing against like the screen time thing. I would rather go out and throw the football than play video games.
Well, what if they can't throw the football back? It goes in the street, and you ain't playing catch. You're playing chase.
So there's,
doesn't it aggravate you eventually? Like, look, you're not a sportsman. Yeah. Let's go inside.
I think as a father, though, there are times, right? You know, you're outside, it's like 100 degrees. You're trying to teach a kid how to swing a bat, you know, and they're my 5-year-old. We were trying to teach him how to throw and all that. And he's chucking the ball all over. Then my 7-year-old, he was actually harder to teach how to throw a ball. He's throwing it everywhere, right? He just couldn't get it down. Then finally, after a while, he got it down. Now, there's an environment, obviously, like, you get, as a dad and as a man, you get frustrated in those times, right? It's hot outside. It's like, man, like, I don't know if you know, sometimes you want to be there, sometimes you don't. Here's one thing that I've done. Sounds really simple. You ever notice that I bring a speaker out every time we're outside and I play music? This sounds kind of crazy, but it works. I like to play the music. Like, in our family, we have music that makes us gather, right? Music like Mumford and Sons, Imagine Dragons, OAR, Dave Matthews, like really cool, like gathering music, right? So when we go outside and we play catch, or we play basketball, throw the football, I play that music. This sounds kind of weird, but it works. What I do is I watch that scene unfold as if I'm watching it and I'm not in it. And I also think about, like, this is what I wanted growing up. At times, is it my favorite thing to do? It's not. But when I put music on and when I watch that situation unfold almost from the third person, I'm like, whether I feel like it or not, this is what's happening. And this is what makes me feel good, right? So that's the way I envision it.
That's a good one. Because I just put myself in that situation, and then I'd be like, yeah, look, there's a good dad right there.
Yeah.
You got any hacks as far as, like, you know, if people are disconnected from their kids, how to get connected?
Absolutely. So people who are disconnected from anybody, right? It could be their kids, could be a friend, could be their wife. Their agenda is I need to get connected. So if I'm going to go have a conversation with this person or be around them, my My goal and agenda is connection, and it's this. It's got to look like this, right? And when we enter in situations like that, there are two things going on. We enter into situations like that with expectation and agenda, and that's human nature. So if I'm going to go have a conversation with one of my kids, I have an expectation of how this is going to turn out, and this is my agenda. Kind of like with what happened with my son last week, right? Here's my agenda. I'm going to ground him for the next 90 days. He's not going to have a thing. And my expectation is, that's just the way it's going to be. If you can flip a switch on expectation and agenda, it's get appreciative and curious. Appreciation and curiosity is the polar opposite of expectation and agenda. So if you want to reconnect with your kids, you don't ask them questions like, Ethan, what's one question we ask each other every day? No, that's not how we say it. How do we really say it? You say it to me all the time. What's been the best part of your day versus how was your day? How was your day will get you fine or good. Those are the answers. What was the best part of your day? Now they're going to story tell. And when they're storytelling, that's when you can really, really leverage that curiosity. So if Ethan tells me, I was like, hey man, what was the best part of your day today? Oh man, like it was track. Track was so cool today at practice. Tell me more. Tell me why it was so meaningful. Today, I really want to get under 14 seconds for my 100-meter dash, and I got 13.8. Man, that's awesome. Like, why was that so meaningful to you? Man, I've been trying so hard to get, below 14 seconds for as long as I can remember. I finally did it today. So when you get curious like that and they story tell, that's when you really that's when they feel ultimately connected, right? Versus, how was your day? Fine. You got any homework? No. What do you want for dinner? Hot dogs, versus the curiosity questions, right? To get them to dive deeper and story tell.
So if I say, how was your day at school? How should I say that?
What was the best part of your day today? And then when they identify that best part, tell me why that was so meaningful to you. What was going on? Tell me more.
What if they don't react like that?
It's hard to give somebody, so first there's a couple things going on with that. You have to keep going. You have to do that day after day after day for a while. Because what could be happening also is you're messing with the perception of the other person. So I have this resource. It's totally free. It's a free resource called 21 Days to an Extraordinary Marriage, where I teach men 3 ways to connect with their wife and then 3 challenges. And within the challenge, there is, I want you to go home today and I want you to look your wife in the eyes and say, tell me about the best part of your day today. Tell me why it was so meaningful to you. And I'll get emails back saying, my wife looked at me like 2 heads, like I had 2 heads at first. And then she completely perked up. And I'll get these emails that are just, and then she told me this and told me this, and then it turned into this conversation, then it turned into intimacy and all these other things. But what happens in the very beginning of anytime you flip a switch on somebody's perception of you, they're going to be like, what are you doing? I don't identify with you. I interviewed Gary John Bishop, who's the best-selling author of, Unfuck Yourself and Stop Doing That Shit. And he talks about this example of if your grandmother came to you, who's 90 years old, and she said, you know what? I've always wanted to do a marathon, and tomorrow I'm training for a marathon. I got a marathon in 90 days. And you'd be like, what are you thinking? Your grandma. What grandma's doing is she's messing with the perception that you have of her. So when we flip a switch on somebody, or we do something outside the norm, what's really happening is we're messing with their perception of us. And it takes a while to continue the same habit or the same tactic before they're like, oh, okay, so this is just part of the norm now. And here's the funny thing is, once you do that for so long, and Ethan, I could tell you, my 15-year-old, he is a pro at this. He now asks me first, what was the best part of your day? Why was it so meaningful? And you're like, it's like, you little Jedi. But it's just one way out of several that you can connect.
Give me one more.
Sure. Tell me about the most challenging part of your day. Right.
Do we really want to dredge that up?
Well, yeah, because so what I do is I'll tell me about the most challenging part of your day. So this is where you can instill a growth mindset or a fixed, right? So if you say, what was the most challenging part of your day? And this is where I really get, like, my kids will open up. And if you create an environment of psychological safety, meaning like whenever they're about ready to tell you something that you may or may not agree with, or it might fire you up, if you can create a learning moment versus a disciplinary moment, you're creating an environment where they'll come to you and talk to you about anything. So like, for instance, if one of my kids are like, what's the most challenging part of your day today? I got a D on the science test. And there's that part of you as a dad, you're like in the back of your mind, this is what's happening, right? You're like, dude, didn't I tell him to study for that test? He was on his phone late. I don't know if he studied. Like I told him over and over again, didn't I tell you to study for that test harder? Right? And then the kids, while there is a time and a place for that, I honestly think, and you know this from all your training, that if you can ask the right questions in a safe environment where someone will articulate the lesson back, it's more meaningful, more impactful for them because they're higher likely to execute it down the road. So if my kid says I got a D on the science test, I'll be like, tell me more. What happened? I don't know. I just got a D. The test was really, really hard, and there'll be fluffy stuff in there. It's just there were questions in there that I didn't expect. Okay. Well, let's talk about this. How much time did you spend studying? Did you give your best effort studying for that test? I didn't really study for it that much. Okay. Well, had it to do over again, what would you do different? I think I would have studied more. I knew it was going to be on the test. I just didn't study for it. I probably would have studied longer. Okay, great. When's your next test? I actually have one next Friday. Okay. So what would you do different based on the information that you have now? Well, I would study more. Okay, great. So when do you want to be held accountable to study next week? Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, whatever it is. Do you need help? I'll study Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning. Okay. I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, but see, now you just got yourself another something to do.
Well, not exactly. I'll hold them accountable.
How? You have to now put that on your calendar.
I do, but I'm okay with that.
I know, but that's the tough part.
It is.
Because I have shit to do.
Right. Yeah.
So now it's like, now I got to remember on Tuesday at 2 to see if my kid did what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
See, that's the commitment. That's like you sacrifice.
It is. I mean, but if you think about it though, we do those same habits in our business, right? If we need to follow up with a customer or we need to follow up with somebody, we do those habits. So if you really think about it, and probably a lot of men who listen to this show too, right? We're already in that habit. We're just not in that habit in the fatherhood aspect. And there's a way to hold kids accountable without badgering them, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm a big fan of natural consequences too. Like, one of my kids had an F in one of his English classes. I wasn't upset. This is my 13-year-old because he's a A and B student. He never has issues with grades. He didn't turn in a big assignment, and so he got an F for a quarter. And I was like, listen, I'm not mad at you because I know that this is not like you, but missing an assignment, I was like, I want you to think about something for a minute. What do you love most about summer? And he'll articulate, oh man, playing with friends, going to Six Flags, football practice, blah, blah, blah. You do realize that if you get an F next quarter, you'll have summer school. And all those amazing things you just listed off, that's not going to happen. So in that case, like to allow him to really reflect on that, like what do you need to do to get that grade up so you don't have to do those things? He passed with flying colors the next quarter. Did just fine. Didn't have to do summer school. So didn't have to punish him, just getting him to articulate what he's going to do better. But yeah, you're right. Sometimes you just have to hold these kids accountable. Sometimes we just have to put it in our calendar.
What about when they fight? Do they fight? Do you fight with your brothers? So how do you stop that?
There's two ways that we stop it. Sometimes, if you notice, we let them go. We purposely, sometimes we don't step in. We're just like, let's just see what unfolds here. Let's see what problem-solving skills that these kids have. If you let kids go along, now granted, if they start like swinging and beating the snot out of each other.
What if they start saying mean things to each other? Like my 8-year-old will literally tell my 6-year-old, her little sister, I don't like you. You're ugly. Nobody likes you. I got to step in when she's saying that.
Yeah, I definitely think that there is a time to
And what's funny is the 6-year-old is the sweet one. All she wants to do is freaking follow her big sister around and, think she's pretty, says she's pretty, nice, And now I see the 6-year-old starting to get a little bit, meaner.
Right.
Because the 8-year-old constantly freaking, like the 8-year-old just, and by the way, the 8-year-old doesn't like to hug, doesn't like to give kisses to nobody. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And it's weird. Yeah. It's weird because like freaking my dad, you know, didn't show a lot of love. Like he didn't hug me. He didn't tell me he loved me, you know, but I knew he did.
Right.
But he didn't say it, and he didn't hug me. He didn't hug any of us. And now like I watch her. She doesn't like hugs. It can't be hereditary. It can't be like something in the bloodlines, is it?
I mean, it could be just a phase, right? Could be a phase.
I'm hoping so, because like that to me that's like, you know, why would someone just not be affectionate to their parents?
Right. I mean, it could be a phase. I mean, like I know all 4 of our boys have gone in and out of phases where they're just like, you know, my 5-year-old right now at 3 and 4, he was like the sweetest, easiest thing. He's going through this phase now where you're like, what happened? Right. But if I look at my 7-year-old, he went through the same thing at 5. And then right when he turned 6, he turned into this sweet little boy again, like that just wants to love on you. But he did go through a time where you're like, dude, like what happened to you? Have you been possessed? Like, but going back to your question of what to do, there have been times where if it gets really, you know, if it gets pretty hot, we just separate the 2 of them, go cool down, both of you. I really think being alone for a moment or moments or whatever that's going to look like, you start to think, right? Because once one person gets fired up, one sibling gets fired up, the other one's going to get fired up, and then your fight or flight, you know, that amygdala in your brain is firing. You just want to, you're not even thinking clearly. So getting them out of that situation, be like, hey, let's calm down just for a minute here, right? And then come back and let's talk about what happens, right? The other thing too is, you know, I'm sure there are things that go on underneath our roof that we probably don't know all about as far as like any things that are said, but we have a rule in our house, which is like, hey, we don't talk to each other like that. We just don't put each other down like that. I'm sure it happens when we're not around. Like I'm sure my 2 older boys probably say things to each other that they probably shouldn't, but we can only control what we control. The other thing too is, I didn't have a good father figure growing up, but I had an amazing grandfather. My grandfather was tough as nails, blue collar worker, drove a truck for 7-Up, could fix anything, fish, all that good stuff. So he was like a man's man, right? But one thing about him that was really cool and refreshing is that I got to see him love my grandmother. And he, to the day he passed away when he was 73, they were married for 50 years. They would just sit there at the table and he would rub her hand and, I love you. You're so beautiful. You know, and like you could see like the genuine, he wouldn't just, those were not just words. Like he felt those things and she would just smile, and it just, that's the way I can honestly say I love my wife. And I love my wife intentionally and purposely in front of my boys. I'll hug her, I'll kiss her, I'll tell her she's beautiful. And a lot of times I make sure I say it loud enough. I do this purposely because I want them to hear it. I want them to grow up being like, hey, this is how you treat a woman. And here's the other thing too. Reciprocated, my wife treats me with a lot of respect. There's no emasculation. There's no disrespect. There's no name calling. She doesn't yell at me. And that's also a good example of like, hey, this is how we treat each other. So, yeah.
Well, I wish I could be a fly on the wall when you're not around just to see what he's doing, see what they're saying. I bet you he'd be in trouble a little bit, wouldn't you? And that's the thing. I think, you know, the way I look at it is, yeah, I could have been way better, and I can always get better, and I probably should be and want to be better, which is why I think I'm going to join the Dad Alliance. I interrupted when I said, how do you join that? How do you join that?
So, you know, we've been doing Dad Edge Alliance since 2016. We have men apply for it just because we really want to understand what it is that's on their mind and heart. It takes just a few minutes to apply. They can go to gooddadproject.com/alliance. Or if you're listening to the show after August 1st, the dadedge.com/alliance. So we have men apply first just so we can really understand what has their attention. What I can tell you is we help men, like I said, in 5 areas, which is optimizing physical, mental, emotional health, creating an extraordinary marriage, a connection with their kids, leadership in business, and mastering their finances. And one thing I can tell you is 8 out of 10 men who apply to be a part of Dad Edge Alliance want to create an extraordinary marriage.
And here's what's crazy. There's a lot of people listening to this podcast because I got a bunch of entrepreneurial nuts want to get rich.
Right.
They're thinking, screw all that, dude. I just want to get rich.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, that's what you have to do. That's what you have to fix to get rich.
I agree 100%.
You have to have that, you know, I don't want, it's almost like peace. Like if you can have a kick-ass marriage and everything's on par, you're so much more likely to succeed.
I totally agree. I mean, the stress, you want to hear some scary statistics?
Yeah.
So everyone knows the divorce rate's over 50%. What people might not know is that the people that stay together, the 50% that stay together, are actually equally divided up into 3 camps. The first camp, the first 33%, can actually identify their marriage as working, and it's everything that they wanted. The next camp, the next 33%, it's like, it's okay. It's not everything I really wanted, but it's okay. Those are the marriages that are good. Maybe they're okay, but they can be great if they just learned some simple skill sets on connection, on conversations, creating an environment of psychological safety, intimacy, being able to ask for what you need, want, desire, all these different things that are so important to marriage. The final camp, and this is where I would always tell men to be very proactive. You don't go 25,000 miles without getting an oil change, but yet we'll do that in our marriages. You've got to be proactive. You got to get in front of things. But the final camp is they're still married, but they're completely disconnected. They have no even desire to stay together. They're just roommates living underneath the same roof. And the two main reasons that that couple stays together is finances. They don't want to go into financial ruin, or they're just waiting for the kids to move out. So if you find yourself in that camp where my marriage is good, you can make it great. You just got to learn the skills to do it.
What about that last camp?
The last camp, I still have seen amazing results from, I mean, dude, listen, I've seen men come and do life with us where either they or their wives had an all-out affair with somebody else. Usually affairs happen because somebody's not getting their needs met and they're not communicating what those needs are, or the other side is not hearing it, right? Because we go about communication very poorly. But even then, if there's a desire on both sides of like, yes, this happened, but I still want to create a relationship with this person. No one ever walked down the aisle to get married because they wanted a mediocre, disconnected marriage. We got married because we said, hey, this is the person I want to be with. And unfortunately, what happens is it's exactly like what we were talking about before. You try to go be that cop before spending 990 hours in the police academy. You go try to be that surgeon without going to medical school. And then you add in kids and work and stress and everything else. And it becomes like, holy crap, like, what do I do and how do I do it? But if both parties are willing to be like, you know what, let's figure this out, you can still create an extraordinary marriage.
I know it's possible, boy, but it is tough.
Very tough, yeah.
You better want it for sure.
Yeah.
What do you think? I got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
If 2 people are fighting and obviously not getting any better to divorce or stay together for the kids?
Well, first of all, conflict resolution is a skill set, right? But
in this scenario, 2 parents, right, they're going to fight, but the kids are just going to deal with it until they're 18 and out of the house. Or 2 parents divorce and now the kids are in 2 happy homes. What do you think out of those 2 is better?
I'm not a fan of divorce, but I think the perception of we have to stay together for the kids, actually, I believe, because I lived under that roof as a kid, that does more damage. That's
what I say.
Yeah. Because, if someone has a terrible marriage and they know that there's just no chance and it's a toxic environment,
or gave up, either one. Because I think there's always possibility, but
right,
both have to have it, and it's tough. But sometimes the parents are just like, screw this, I ain't doing it.
Yeah.
And once you've made that decision, separate or stay in a unhappy, miserable home.
If both parties are willing to go for it, then yeah, go out, be a student, learn the skills. You can learn them. Now, if your perception is my house is absolute misery, I don't want to be with this person anymore, but I'm stuck here because of the kids. Staying together for the kids is disastrous, because think about that. Your kids don't necessarily learn from the words that we say. They learn by the example. I could sit here and tell my boys, this is how you love a woman. But if all they see is a disconnected marriage between me and my wife, where we fight and we argue, we call each other names and we scream and we yell, it doesn't matter what words I say. So think about, if you want to stay together for the kids, you're not teaching them any type of relationship skills whatsoever by staying together for the sake of them. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I'll share on that one is, I remember every time my mom's relationships would come to an end, and there was that part of me that's like, man, especially when I was 10 and my stepdad left, and there was a part of me that was like, man, that really sucks. Like, I don't have a dad in this house anymore. However, I don't have to put up with them screaming and yelling and hitting each other and getting drunk. I don't have to deal with him hitting me and screaming at me and yelling in my face. So there was a sense of relief as well that went with that separation.
Well, what about, like, in my mind, my kids, and I have one 36, let's say 33, 26, no, 27, 25, 7, 6, and 1 on the way. So I look at the older ones.
Yeah.
Again, wasn't a very good dad compared to what I could have been, but I did what I could. None of them are addicted to drugs. None of them are, in prison. None of them are criminals. They're all doing decent. Again, I mean, like, they're all freaking, none of them have been to Harvard either, but, but, listen, in my mind, I'm like, hey, they turned out all right. Don't you believe that even sometimes, even if we are shitty parents, the kids have a way of figuring it out themselves. Like, again, you had shitty parents. Look at you. You figured it out. So I just want to give some people support out there, because, it's not like, because I'll tell you, just because you don't necessarily do it right doesn't mean it won't turn out right. But I definitely think, if you're listening to this and you're like identifying with any of it, I would say go to goodproject.com/alliance.
Good Dad Project.
Good Dad Project. My writing's terrible.
That's all right.
It does say that. /alliance and see if you can apply and get in that group. There's like hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And they all help each other.
They do.
Yeah. I don't know if there's someone listening that's like, man, this is exactly what I'm talking about. But if I were you guys, I'd look this dude up, follow him at The Dad Edge on IG, Larry Hagner on all other platforms, Lawrence Hagner on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Lawrence.
Yeah. Okay. I need to update that. I'm not very active on LinkedIn.
Plus you got books. You got a book out there called The Dad Edge. You got a podcast called
The Dad Edge.
The Dad Edge. You're all about being a good dad and bringing the family together and, teaching communication skills, teaching better marriage skills. Again, I'm going to have my wife listen to this, and then she's probably going to say, well, you need to join that. Because again, I mean, she wants to too.
Yeah.
But it's just, we don't know how. Like, dude, it gets frustrating. And then I blame her, and then she gets pissed. I'm like, what are you doing all day?
Right.
Like, I'm at work all day. I'm the one making all this money. Like, you need to be the one being the disciplinarian. I need to come home and, be the nice guy. But she's the nice girl all at home. But, you can see it on her face, frustrated. She doesn't know what to do either. You got anything for moms?
So
where's your wife?
Right.
That's her spot now.
I know, right?
That'd be perfect, actually.
What's funny is my wife and I was like, all these guys in the group and the community, I can't even tell you like how many guys are like, do you have a mom's edge? And I don't. But there's a resource out there that I can definitely point men to. I'm sure you probably know who Hal Elrod is.
Oh, yeah.
Miracle. Okay. So Hal Elrod and Lance and Brandy Salazar wrote the book Miracle Morning for Couples. Brandy Salazar has a group for moms called the Mama Wives Tribe. It's basically run just like Dad Edge Alliance, except for it's for moms. We actually have a lot of guys in the Alliance who have joined that group, and she does virtually the same thing we do, except for moms. So yeah, there's
have you guys ever like had a master mingle retreat?
Not a retreat, especially with everything over the past 18 months, but we have done a lot of combined Zoom calls and seminars and Q&As. And that's just so we can hear like the woman's point of view, the man's point of view, all those types of things.
That's awesome.
There is one thing I do want to share though about the last comment that you made, and that is, trying to execute parenting flawlessly is absolutely impossible. Ethan, my oldest, as God is my witness, will tell you there are ugly moments in my house every day. There is raising of voices from me or my wife. There are things that are said. You're like, crap, I wish I wouldn't have said that. There's a loss of patience still. My wife my life under my own roof, my family, we are not sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. It's not. But what I will tell you is our batting average of success is higher than what it was. And in the times that we do screw up, I mean, man, how many times have I apologized to you? Because there are times, if anything, it's brought awareness, because I'm like, I know exactly what happened there. I know exactly why I lost my patience. I know exactly why I said what I said. But now I have an opportunity to make it right. Right. And the awareness factor and the strategy of like, when I do screw up, because I will, what do I do next?
Yeah.
Versus just self-sabotage, beat myself up, and should all over myself. I shouldn't have done that. I should be better, right? I don't self-sabotage anymore. I try to just flip that on its head and just say, what can I learn and how can I make this right?
Yeah.
Versus beating ourselves up.
Well, not to end it on a crazy note, because I know we're running out of time. Matter of fact, damn, we're over time, but it just made me think of this. Like, I had a buddy, I won't say his name, good guy, big Christian guy, faith-based guy. Unfortunately got divorced. His wife cheated on him. Still a good guy. Loved his kids. Like what I would consider a great dad. Well, his 16-year-old daughter was told, you can't see your boyfriend, because the boyfriend was like trouble. So the dad, my buddy said, and I'm sure in a nice, kind, soft way, because like that's all he was kind. Like he'd probably make you look like an asshole. This guy is freaking nice, good dude, like unbelievable. Guess what? His daughter and son decided
To escape and elope?
To kill him.
To kill the dad?
Stabbed him 71 times, tried to chop up his body and burn it.
Oh my God.
You can Google it here in Las Vegas.
That is crazy.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, I told my wife when I heard that story, like, oh my gosh, like this guy was one of the nicest guys you ever want to meet. One of the best dads, always there, always concerned, passed up job opportunities because he's got to be with the kids. And the kid, in this case, it didn't respond.
Yeah.
So what do you think of that? Like, what's your thought on that deal?
I mean,
but that's a fluke. But
right.
Still, I just thought of that. Like, oh my Lord.
I mean,
look at the Menendez brothers. Remember a long time ago?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do? What are some signs that you should be looking for where, hey, you could be parenting and trying and, not spanking and doing everything you think right. What are some signs that you know about where if they're displaying any kind of certain signs, maybe professional help might be better?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, every situation in family is different, right? And my gosh, man, sorry to hear about that loss. That's just absolutely crazy. I do think, like you mentioned the Menendez brothers, right? You mentioned this situation. I think that those are more anomalies, right? Here's the other thing I'll say too. Just because you're the nice guy, all my kids will tell you, there are times I ain't so nice. Do I try to be supportive and be there for them? Absolutely. Do I connect with them? Yeah. But there are times where I drop the hammer on these kids too. I think there's got to be a balance, right? Because you're a nice guy and you're there for them, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily raising good humans. There's got to be that dichotomy of discipline. There's punishments in there, right? There's also connection. There's also psychological safety. There's right from wrong. There's all these things. But yeah, what I can tell you, like I'm looking at my two oldest boys, right? Because the two youngest, like they're 5 and 7. But my two oldest boys, I look at them and they're doing the everyday stuff, right? They're doing good things, and the stuff that they're doing isn't outside the box. I will say this, and this is from firsthand experience. when we see something outside the box, there have been times where it's like, we're going to go see a counselor. We're going to vet this out, because there are situations that have arose under my own house where like, this is above my pay grade, like, so to speak, right? This is above what I can do. We got to get extra help. So in that situation, if you see things like that, man, there's help out there.
Who would you call? Like a family counselor?
So we've done family counseling before. There's one resource out there that I think has been brilliant for kids, for adults. Psychology with the kids, man, it is tricky. There could be all kinds of things that are at play. And even if you look at kids who are medicated, ADHD, depression, anxiety, right? If you really look at professionals out there, they're like, oh, these are your symptoms. Go try this for 8 weeks and let me know how it works out. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Daniel Amen. He wrote the book, Change Your Life, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. He's a New York Times bestselling author. He's absolutely brilliant. He goes about treating, tweens, teens, adults very differently. It doesn't matter if it's ADHD. It doesn't matter if it's bipolar, psychotic depression. What he does is he does an entire day workup, and then he does a brain scan. And he can tell within a 92% success rate exactly what the diagnosis is of that person. If you have someone who's displaying any type of behavior and you give them the wrong medication, holy crap, man, that can send them down a rabbit hole. I have a story on that. I'm not going to share it out of the privacy of our family. But if you put somebody on the wrong medication, really drastic, horrible things can happen. When you understand exactly what's going on, like let's just say if you have someone who has anxiety, but you give them a depression medication, that's going to tailspin them into a whirlwind of hurt, most likely. If you treat that, if you understand, okay, it's not depression, it's actually anxiety, let's go ahead and have a treatment plan for that, and then execute that plan, the success rate's higher. But I truly believe in what he does, and I have no financial affiliation with him, but I think he does it well. He's got several books out there. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life is one of them. He's got clinics across the country. But I honestly think there are things that are at work as a parent. Doesn't matter how good of a man or father you are. These kids, man, they're going through things that we're just not qualified to help them through. And in that particular situation, family counselor, it might even be the emergency room. It might be something like Dr. Daniel Amen. It's just something where you're pulling in other resources besides handling this on your own.
Well, I would highly suggest people pay attention to that, because the next thing you know, they've done something they can't come back from.
Right.
And you were like, man, I thought they were happy. There's signs.
Yeah.
Or the shooters that go to the school and start shooting people. Like,
right.
What were their parents doing? Did they not notice anything weird? Any kind of comments? Like, if I ever saw my little kid like kill a cat and enjoy it,
it's terrifying.
Well, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. Like, what are those things? Like, hey, good dad, bad dad, doesn't matter. You see your kid, killing cats, like, go do something. Because that's when you intervene. You don't just be like, oh my God, who would kill a cat? So do you know of any, from all the experts you've talked to, have you talked to any of them that are like, when you see signs of this, you should get help?
I think anytime you see, so there's one other resource that I'll point your audience in the direction of. We talked about screen time. We talked about devices. A lot of times what's going on in these kids' lives, like we'll see them from the outside, right? And be like, oh, my kid's happy. They make good grades. They're doing this, they're doing that. But we don't see other things that we might not see. If your kid has a device that accesses the internet, doesn't matter if it's a Chromebook, iPad, phone, or whatever, there's an incredible resource out there that our show actually partners with called Bark. Bark is an app. It's been out for a handful of years now, I think three or 4 years. Bark is an app that works in the background of your kid's device. And it also, it sends you alerts when it detects anything. And what it does is it detects keywords. It detects their email, their social media, their text messages, every app, every internet search, everything. So if you start to see that your kid is searching on the internet how to kill a cat and enjoy it, then it's time to go have a conversation or get resources. But what it does is it It keeps up with their evolution of language, and it detects suicidal ideation, adult content,
bullying,
cyberbullying, bullying, predator, any type of predator that might be trying to get to your kid online. It detects that. It detects alcohol, drugs, profanity.
Does it read inside the app? Like if they're in TikTok?
Yeah. So if they're searching something that comes up that isn't appropriate on TikTok, it will show you exactly what they saw.
Because my kid, believe it or not, is allowed to be on TikTok. Both of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I keep being told, oh, they can't see anything, they can't do anything, but they can. I walk by, I'm like, what did I just hear?
Right.
And they're on TikTok. But again, you take away TikTok, they freak out because they like making the TikTok videos.
Right.
So I told my wife one time, we're deleting the app. I deleted the app because I got pissed. And finally I'm like, I don't care. And I'm loud and I'm pissed and I'm like, I already know better.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to allow this crying and this bullshit. It's over. And so I deleted them. Within a week or two, back on TikTok. And guess what I did? Allow them on TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like dude. So this alliance is somewhere where like you can probably go talk to people, get other people's opinions that have dealt with it, figure out different ways to handle things, different forms of punishment that aren't, cruel and unusual, like ass beatings with a belt.
Right.
Anyway, I'm glad you came, man.
Thanks for having me.
You're out there doing good stuff.
You as well.
I hope everybody listening to this understands the importance of this and shares it no matter what, because even though you're sparkling clean and you're the perfect daddy, maybe someone you share it with is wanting to hear exactly this. And again, if you guys want to follow this dude, the Dad Edge on IG, Larry Hagner on all those platforms, Lawrence Hagner on LinkedIn. And again, dude, appreciate you coming out.
Thanks for having me, man.
Till next time, guys, keep it real.
Dropping bombs with the real Brad Lea. Subscribe now.